The Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra is not my smartphone of the year. And we're not here to bash anybody who chooses the S24 Ultra as their smartphone of the year. These awards are meaningless. It's all based on personal preference anyway. I wanted to come on and have a discussion because it dovetails perfectly with the video I did about One UI 7 yesterday and just how I feel that this smartphone couldn't possibly win my award for best of the year because I think the S24 Ultra embodies everything wrong with Samsung this year and everything that needs to change. Because when I think of the best smartphone of the year, it has to be more than just a composite of the nuts and bolts of the phone. Because yes, on the surface of it, if you're just looking at specs, if you're just looking at performance, how it felt, how it operated, this is an excellent smartphone. And there probably is a great case to be made for this as smartphone of the year, but you have to take into account the entire landscape. And I would feel very uncomfortable giving Samsung a pat on the head, a gold star for the most uninspiring smartphone in years, which is saying something because I just used the S23 Ultra. I can't highlight how it feels like Samsung is disconnected with the consumer base. And I think it's starting to show. You saw the softening sales for the foldables. I think that's just the beginning. If Samsung doesn't take a bigger swing on the S25 Ultra, which I don't think it's going to do, you're going to start seeing softening sales there as well. And that's the only time that the company is going to respond and actually take larger swings with innovation. Because this phone, while yes, performs wonderfully, did have some issues on it. Issues that were there on the S23 Ultra, issues that were there on the S22 Ultra. Samsung did not address a single user complaint with this phone. In fact, if anything, I think the company went backwards. Display saturation, that's a personal preference. There are a bunch of different things. Mostly the camera and the camera app, which now One UI 7 is going to be, I think, the company's third attempt in however long to try to clean up the camera app. Camera performance. There are plenty of things that Samsung needed to address with the S24 Ultra that were not addressed. It was a copy and paste from previous years. They squared it off. Yes, flat design. Yes, all of those things are true. And I'm not going to tell you that this is a bad phone because it's not. But the other manufacturers, namely Google and OnePlus, did a much better job this year listening to consumer complaints, addressing problems with their devices, and making them better to buy. And you're seeing that. The 9 series, the Pixel 9 series, is doing significantly better than than previous years, and that's even up against the iPhone. Because Google went down the list. What are the problems with our smartphone? What do people complain about with Pixels? Why don't they buy that survey that we saw? There was a consumer confidence or consumer loyalty for Pixel devices was the lowest out of all the major manufacturers. Why? Because there were some front-end things that were problems. If that were Samsung, they just would have let it ride. Would have let it ride. Google went down the list finally. Took them long enough, but it finally happened. Display. Pixel displays were always a notch below what Samsung was shipping. Super AQUA display, not the case anymore. Vibrant, bright, beautiful, just as good as anything that Samsung ships. Big difference. Tensor, overheating, not anymore. Tensor G4 is pretty darn good. Yes, is the gaming performance the same as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in your S24 Ultra? No. Google does need to improve the gaming performance on the phone. However, doesn't overheat, and you get significantly better battery life than you used to on Tensor devices. Now I get just as much battery life on my Pixel 9 Pro XL than I do on my S24 Ultra. Software, same thing. A lot more reliable than it used to be. Updates don't break things randomly. and Android 15, running well. Fingerprint sensor, ultrasonic fingerprint sensor now on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. You could go down the line. But they were all front-end experience things that Google worked on. OnePlus, same thing. Got back to its roots. Lots of power and performance. Better value. Oxygen OS, I think, is probably the best software that the company shipped at least in the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I understand. They borrow heavily from iOS. So does Samsung on the upcoming One UI 7, by the way. So I can't really eat anybody's lunch for that. But it doesn't really matter because OnePlus addressed concern as well. Samsung did not. So it's not to the point now where Samsung could throw together flagship hardware, good software, reliable software, and call it a day and win by default. Those days are over because the other manufacturers weren't standing still. And if you really hand on heart, if you had to ask me, what my smartphone of the year is, it's probably going to be the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Because I felt the best using that device. I felt like I was using a device that the company listened to my concerns. And it's not just my concerns. We had a bunch of complaints about these devices in the past. Samsung, that doesn't feel like the case. And it's frustrating because Samsung had such a large lead. And yes, okay, they had less to do. They had less areas to improve on. But that doesn't mean you stand still until the other guy runs up alongside of you. That's not how you win a race. That's not how you keep your lead. That's not how you continue to impress customers. That just seems to be the default for Samsung now in 2024. So if you're talking to me about giving them an award, it's certainly not going to be for a phone that absolutely embodies everything I think is wrong with current day Samsung. Company has to innovate more. They has to be unafraid to take some chances that are going to bring these phones into the next 5 years. Because you can flip a coin. It might be possible that Samsung just turns into Apple. We'll get the same design for 10 years. And like, oh, people are going to buy it anyway. I don't think the company has that kind of leeway that Apple does. And yes, does Samsung ship some of the most reliable and best software on the platform? Absolutely. But that's getting closer. Pixel software has gotten a lot better. Like we said, Oxygen OS is getting better. So it's not going to be the same anymore. And the software is going to be judged on different metrics. It's not to the point where you can say, well, One UI is reliable, and that's more than I can say about Google software, because at least my Wi-Fi doesn't break every time I get a security patch. Yeah, okay, that was the case 2 years ago. Not the case now. What have you done for me lately? So Samsung really needs to address some of these issues going forward before it can get an award for best smartphone of the year. And why do we talk about these things? Because I got a lot of pushback yesterday on the video about One UI 7. Well, it's in beta. You know, you got to wait until the product comes out and then you can address these things. You can complain about these things. We don't know. This is the time when you do these things. In a beta, before the next phone comes out, when they're planning for the next phone after that. This is when you address these problems. If the beta were just performing poorly, apps are crashing, stuff is glitching out, stuff's not working well. Fine, I get your point. I'm not going to eat Samsung's lunch for that. It's a beta. That's the point. Not really the case. What I take issue with, and what I take issue with here for the S24 Ultra, is the direction of the company and the feeling and the features that the company focuses on. Because it feels more and more like Samsung's just doing its own thing out there. And this is what we want to do, and this is what whatever, and you can get away with that. Like Apple 20 years ago, when you can tell people what they want before they know what they wanted, before they know they want it. But so far, not so good. Samsung's telling us a lot of stuff that it thinks we want. Not really the response of things that we eventually feel like we need. And that's going to be a concern, I think, more and more in 2025 than it was in 2024. But 2024 was a lost year for Samsung. Just a really disappointing batch of products. I feel like the company is now going to feel the pain of that. Sales are going to soften. If the S25 Ultra comes out mostly the same as the S24 Ultra, you're going to see the same result that we saw with the foldables back in the summer. How pre-sales weren't there and it was just starting to soften a little bit. You kind of see that soft underbelly of Samsung starting to rear its head. I think that's where we're headed. So if you're going to tell me that this is the phone of the year, I don't think so. Not when there are other manufacturers actually listening to our concerns, actually innovating with their products, actually trying different stuff. And One UI 7 is different. It is early. They could do, yes, they can upgrade that now bar. They can add a bunch of other things. They can make Galaxy AI more useful than it is. I think they need to add a few other little things, like I said, like Now Playing and some other stuff that are functional with the Pixel software that I would like to have a version of on the Samsung software, but it's early. They could add a lot of those things, and I could still be surprised. But if the last 3 or 4 years are any indication, I don't think Samsung's up for surprising anybody. I think it's fine just staying the course, making money, and coming out with safe designs like the S24 Ultra. But this, to me, as good as the hardware is, as good as the software is, the other manufacturers are right there now. The old arguments don't work anymore. It's not 2 years ago when you could say, well, this works. Pixel doesn't. Not the case. If you've made it this far, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Until next time, have that Steve-licious day.